2, 1, we're live.
Okay, welcome back to Senate Education, 223. Okay, we are now on, we have the rest of the bill, Ms. St. James. So if we could return to that, please.
Sure.
I think you wanted us to jump to about page 150.
Correct.
Okay, so on 150, everyone. Go ahead.
Thank you, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So, and I apologize, I think the highlighting in here was for a different purpose, that for the whole section to be highlighted, but the changes occur, it's basically the same thing as we just discussed. When you reviewed this language on Friday, the roles were kind of flip-flopped, where it was the State Board of Education providing an initial advisory opinion and then the secretary providing the final decision. And so those roles have been switched. So it is this new school district in section 4 has to send in their status report to the Secretary of Education. The secretary reviews it, makes a determination of whether he or she thinks preparedness will be likely by the operational date. If the agencies, if the secretary's opinion is, yep, looks good, then they continue on their merry way. If the secretary says it does not look good, issues an unlikely determination on page 152, then the secretary would issue an advisory opinion. The new school district would review that advisory opinion and would decide whether they want to take the off-ramp or petition the State Board of Education for review of the secretary's advisory opinion. And it's the same concept as we just discussed. If the state board, as the final arbiter here, says, you know what, it really does look good to us, then again, they can continue to work towards the operational date. But if the state board says it determines that preparedness is unlikely, I'm on page 154, then the state board shall reverse and void earlier declarations, line 10. The petitioning town shall be a town within the union district, and the state board's determination is final. So they have to, it's an undoing action. It undoes the withdrawal action and sends this town back to square one. So this is the same concept that you reviewed on Friday. It's just the roles of the state board and the agency are switched.
Okay, thank you.
And then in section 6, it's the same situation. It's a little different here because the state board has not made any declarations and there is no new school district. So some of the language is a little different. So in example, instead of the new school district deciding, it's the self-selected petitioners who pursued the withdrawal process to begin with. But it's the same, it's kind of a switch of what you reviewed on Friday. It's the agency giving an advisory opinion of whether or not the withdrawal action should proceed. Remember, this is where the votes have already happened, but the state board has not approved the withdrawal proposal yet. So the secretary gives an initial recommendation. If the secretary's recommendation looks good, then the state board shall vote to approve it. And they can work towards an operational date. If the secretary says preparedness looks unlikely, then it's the same situation. They can decide to stop the withdrawal process and remain a part of the union school district, or they could ask for the state board to review the agency's decision. And if the state board agrees with the agency that it does not look like the new school district will be prepared on its operation, the proposed new school district would be prepared on its operational date, then they can stop the process. And again, it's just a flip-flop of the roles from what you reviewed on Friday.
Right.
And then the only other...
Hold on, Beth, we have a question, Senator Berkshire.
I know we try not to use the names of the towns, but can you tell me the town? So section 4 is Ripton, right?
Correct.
And section 5 is Lincoln? Does it go Ripton, Lincoln? No?
No,
Or
section 5 is Stowe. And 6 would be Lincoln. or any town that meets the criteria of applicability for those sections.
And there is no Starksboro section because that they would just, because it just says, if you haven't started, had your vote by the certain date, they're lumped in with anybody that would go in the future.
Yes, section 7 applies to any situation where there has been one vote, so the petitioning down is voted, but the other voters in the Union District have not voted. So section 7 would apply to any Union School District and petitioning town that fits that situation.
And that's Starksboro situation.
No, I don't, well, let's hear from Ben.
It's the effective date question.
I'm not familiar enough with what Starksboro has or hasn't done to answer that question. I think that would be a better question for someone who has dealt with Starksboro. I think that might be Donna.
They're voting
In May,
in like May.
in May. They already have warned the vote,
They've warned to vote.
so.
Who's
Might we
voting
hear-
in May?
So if
That's fine.
Starksboro is voting in May,
So,
they've warned a vote, what section would apply to a town that's in a similar situation?
No,
I'm sorry, but the vote is warned for who? The petitioning town or the voters within the Union District?
just the petitioning.
petitioning time.
So section 7 applies if a town within a Union School District voted, but the voters of each of the other towns have either not voted or that vote hasn't been finalized yet.
On the effective date of the bill or by what,
Yes.
on what date?
On the effective, section 7 would take effect right now as drafted on the effective date of the bill. And there's one effective date, and that is, I think you on Friday decided to change it from July 1 to take effect on passage.
All sections.
All sections. You can certainly carve out different sections with different effective dates, but this bill does not have that carve out or that specificity at this point.
And one of the big outstanding questions that we're going to jump into next has to do with timing. So that could be related to everything that we're talking about.
Do we have any indication as to whether there are other towns? I know that there was some discussion about, what would this do to other towns that decided to withdraw? Are there other towns that are in the Starksboro situation where the vote has been warned?
We've not heard of any.
So,
Daphne, would you get Donna Russo Savage, please? Thanks. Anything else, Beth, at this point? Or would you please please, actually?
I think there's just one more change since we last looked at this, and that was that the Union School District withdrawal report in section 10 has been changed from a one-time report to an annual report.
That's right.
On Union District withdrawal. There's an automatic, there's discussion about it being a 5-year responsibility, and there's an automatic provision in state law that any ongoing annual report requirement stops after 5 years. So that would automatically, you'd have to the legislature would have to re-up that reporting requirement after 5 years. Or you could decide to re-up it now and just put a notwithstanding that provision of law if you want withdrawal reports annually past 5 years.
I think we like what we did on Friday. I think that seems to make the most sense. Okay. Daphne, would you ask Ms. Simmons to join us as well? Committee, questions for Ms. St. James? So what I'm looking at, issues of sort of final questions, final decision points. We have the employee transition language, which we've included. We'll hear from the NEA and SBSA tomorrow. I'm going to ask Ms. Simmons and Ms. Russo Savage to join us now. And then I think there's a question about commingling still outstanding. Why don't we transition to that right now?
So I just want to thank Elizabeth for drafting a commingling amendment that all it would do is just give the communities the option to commingle or not, but I do not want to move it forward if the senator from Chittenden, Senator Lyons, is opposed to it. She knows school union districts better than any other. So if you just indicate now you think the language as is okay. So I would like to withdraw.
Okay, so we're done with commingling. I appreciate
I
that.
appreciate what you're trying to do.
Okay. Okay.
Wow. So I'd like you to hang out with me more often.
Yeah.
Anytime.
The power that she wields in the
Yeah,
podium
I
is just
know.
amazing.
Thankfully.
He did it.
She knows the process better than I, so I completely
I appreciate that, both of you. All right, so we're just waiting. I want to have Donna here and Emily to add to this conversation so we can get to a good final point on this. Senator Perslick, you've been working with the Addison County delegation. Can you give us an update on where they're at?
Well, I spoke to 50% of the Addison County delegation. And they did have some good points. I met with Councilor St. James just before this, so we didn't have time to kind of write it up, but they just had a few, I would say there are minor changes. One is like make sure VLCT is consulted in the closures study. Because they have a kind of dog in the fight, so to speak, and would want to weigh in on how these affect towns. They advocated for a 2-year moratorium, which I agreed with on the closure, because they thought 1 year just really isn't enough time to think about it.
Yeah, and we debated a little bit. We
I
talked
think
a
we
little
said
bit
that, yeah.
2 year. Yeah.
They thought they were worried about an SU being forced to take a town that it's got similar to like a town being forced to merge, like just what can we at least make sure that the SU is consulted about this kind of reforcing, like just to put it out there, like if Ripton is forced back into the SU, does the SU, what if the SU doesn't want him back or something like that? It's kind of not just so stark like that, but at least make sure that the SU is consulted. And as we were talking about the dates yesterday with the BOE chair about like they have the vote in August and then BOE has the appeal in September, and how we would try to figure it all out for if the SU does take a town back, how can they do it in their budget cycle? So we talked about, in that instance, giving the towns another year. So right now, Ripton's date of operation was pushed back to July 23. But we talked about if the education secretary, after the whole process that we have in the bill says, no, we still think you're going to be ready, giving the SU and the town a full year to figure out how they're going to merge back, instead of trying to really push it in that fall of like, or because we were talking about, well, we could have a contingent budget in case they have to take them back.
Right.
So he said, why don't we just, and it kind of, I think, goes to Senator Lyons' point about how did they reconcile, and forcing it quickly might be a problem. So it's like, okay, operate the way you are for another year, but you get a year to figure out how you're going to be folded back into the SU. The other question was about a town that wants to just close its school, and do we need to address it in here, or is that just something that a town could do at any point in the process? So like a town like Ripton, could they just say, so the Board of Education hears the appeal and says, now you have to go back to the SU, and they say, well, you know what, we're just going to close our school and become a sending town. Can they do that? Like, do we need to talk about it? Was this kind of raised as an issue?
It's interesting.
Is that an option for them? Do we want to spell out that option, or is that just an option?
I mean, Daphne, any updates?
Not yet.
Okay, I mean, current law would allow them, I believe, to close.
Right, but not if they were part of an SU. So if they're sort of in this kind of transition period, like they have the off ramp, they have this process, but do we need to mention that in law?
That
Or
was a
is it-
good question.
And then
Hmm.
there was something about the closure study. Maybe it was just that VLCT wanted to,
We added to it.
I think there might have been something else, but I think that those are the main things.
All right, so you'll work with Ms. St. James on those. We'll consider all of those tomorrow.
The other thing was the definition we have for closure of a school for the moratorium.
Yeah.
The whole school or any grade. I wondered if like, instead of having the whole town, like if you have a K through 6 and you want to move the 6th grade over to the middle school and have it K through 5, you need to have a town vote for that one grade. So right now we have it any grade,
Yeah,
you need a town vote. We thought maybe that was.
We could say
like
any
a
grade that
majority.
results in the closure of the school.
Or a majority, like
Yeah.
you wouldn't want them just like
Yeah, yeah.
take 6th grades and leave the kindergarten, say, hey, we're not closing the school, there's
right.
still a kindergarten there.
Right.
So
Oh,
it's like a majority of the,
yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
That's very helpful, thank you, and it all seems in line with the direction that we're moving in, smart edits. Anything else that anybody needs at this point? Perfect timing. We have time to answer.
I have these 3.
Donna, hello, Emily?
Hi, I'm here. I'm not sure if Emily is on yet. This is Donna.
Hi,
Hi.
yeah.
Oh, she
Emily's
is.
here.
Yay.
So I have testimony here from Ms. Simmons as well as Oliver Olson. And I'm wondering if one of you might represent, actually Donna, if you would help us make our way through Mr. Olson's memo, that would be helpful.
I'd be happy to. I think that Mr. Olson's memo, as it turns out, very much supports Ms. Simmons' memo,
Oh,
and she gives a little bit more detail. So perhaps if she goes first.
sounds great. I'm passing out a copy of Ms. Simmons' memo dated April 26, 2022. Ms. Simmons, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Emily Simmons, Agency of Education. Yes, we'll go through my memo, and it is, I did notice, very similar to the memo you received from Oliver Olson. So this works out nicely, I think.
And Ms. Simmons, as you know, it doesn't get closer to the 11th hour than where we're at. So any, I'd say, highlighting must-pass language would be great at this point.
Yes, these comments are all in support of the draft that you've gone through with Ms. St. James today, and I would say are all in the name of moving things in the same direction and making the bill stronger along
Great.
those lines. So our only change to the, what I think everybody is calling the going forward withdrawal language, so actually amending Title 16 and not the session law, is around this concept I believe you have identified as timing being tight for the
Yeah.
agency to do that work. Our recommendation to negotiate just the reality that timing will be tight is to allow the study committee to agree to give the secretary more time, so that the study committee essentially can force the secretary to those 90 days. But if everybody's simpatico and agrees that more time would be helpful to all parties, timing can be extended only if the committee agrees.
Center line.
But was there any discussion about the length of time for the extension? I know I could see a study committee just extending it and extending it and extending it. So one of the reasons we put the time frame in was to have some decision making. So
So-
any thoughts there?
Yes, Senator Lyons, it's against the study committee's interest to let things drag on. They will be the ones asking for this to go forward because they're the ones who want, we assume, out of their current arrangement. So they would be in the driver's seat of timing here.
But I understand that, but there still should be some closure to this. So is it an extension for up to 30 days or 60 days or 90 days? That's all. Any thoughts that you have there?
No, Senator Lyons, we don't think a second backup deadline is necessary. It's either the 90 days or an extension that the committee and the agency agree to.
So they have 90, we're giving them 90 days, allow the study committee. It basically gives the Secretary of State more time. And if it's not completed within the 90 days, then the state board and the secretary have to come to an agreement on what an extension might look like.
No, I'm so sorry. This is a deadline on the secretary writing that advisory opinion,
Okay,
which is a 90-day deadline on the secretary's work in your draft. Our recommendation is to keep that 90 days and
Okay.
add the words, unless the study committee, the other party, essentially, agrees to an extension of that deadline, that 90-day deadline.
So the secretary could ask for an extension, but the committee could deny it. Yeah.
Yes.
objections, questions? Okay, I think we're gonna move forward with that. Thank you. Ms. St. James, you're following along? Great, thank you.
So the rest of my comments are going to be about the session law. So at the end of the
Yeah.
bill, Section 4 and Section 6, they deal with Ripton and Lincoln respectively. My comments go to both sections and my rationale comes from both sections. So your current draft creates a process to assess the readiness of the new district in the case of Ripton and the petitioning town representatives in the case of Lincoln. Assessment to determine readiness, to assume full responsibility on the proposed operational date. This work to assess readiness is slated to take place over a timeline between July 1 of this summer and November 1 this fall. The work goes first, the study committee proposing a report of readiness. Then you have the secretary analyzing that report of readiness. And then you have potential action by the state board by November 1, which is all very important timing. We're all trying to put these districts and their union school district partners on solid footing to act responsibly no matter the outcome. So this is essentially all a race to budgeting season for the following year.
Right.
Our proposal to get a little more or a lot more time out of this process just for these two school districts is to streamline so that the proposal goes directly to the state board, not the Agency of Education, but that the Agency of Education is supportive to the state board with that analysis, opinions that they need, but that we take that month that would be given to the secretary for lots of activity that would be hard to squeeze into a month, quite frankly. We give that time over to the state board's analysis. So the problem that we see in the current draft is that there's too much happening in too short a period of time this summer for two proposals, right? So I've put an example here. Under the current draft, in the month of July, the secretary would be required to warn and conduct a local meeting in Ripton, the same in Lincoln, hear input at those meetings, then go back to the agency, analyze the report from Ripton, the report from Lincoln, formulate and issue written determinations for both. And then we go on to the state board. We think that that time is better used with the state board ultimately making the determination. So what you would have, and we have proposed language that would draft language to help see where these changes would be made in the draft, but the outline is here in my memo under suggestion. So the process we're proposing is simpler, allows for more time for careful analysis. The new district gives its status report directly to the state board. The state board takes testimony and then can either move things forward or not with respect to each of those two situations.
Committee. Senator Hooker.
I'm really confused because I thought that we were handing this to the board because, or to the agency, because the board wasn't equipped to do the analysis. And was that not the discussion last week? So are you switching back to having the board do the analysis?
Ms. Simmons.
Senator Hooker, we are proposing that the state board have the analysis, but that it be supported at that stage by the agency's staff, by the information that we can bring them, by our own analysis that our staff can do, rather than at 2 points in time, have that happen at 1 point in time to make things faster. That I'm really motivated here by being alarmed at how much needs to happen in order to get an answer for these communities ahead of their steps they would have to take in the next budget season, regardless of the decision at the agency level and the state board level.
Right. You share our concern, as we've expressed today as well as last week, that timing of all this is key. And that's where you're weighing in right now and trying to help guide us a little bit. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. And, you know, when I reflected on this with Ms. Russo Savage, we saw that if you do things too quickly, it does not benefit the petitioning town and the new district in this case. When we have to make quick decisions, we tend to make the decision against the unknown. And we want to have the decider, in this case, whether it's the agency or the board, have enough time to be really thoughtful rather than be rushed.
Committee. Senator Persson.
Like I said, I don't have a question for Emily. I understand what she's saying, so I just have a question about do these reports and plans need to be done by July 1st, I guess?
In our proposal, the report or the plan would be due to the state board by July 1st.
Right, and I understand that. I'm just wondering, do we need it to be by July 1st? I guess if you want to be, if the idea is that both of these towns would be operational by the following July 1st,
Right.
then I could see you'd want to do that, but I don't know if there's value in not trying to get to that date.
I'd recommend keeping the July 1st deadline because that provides more time for a thoughtful analysis well in advance of budgeting season for next year.
But do you feel it provides enough time for the towns to issue their report and plan, like the thoughtful analysis they would need to do to have a final draft by July 1st?
I do, because both of the, well, in one case, the action has already been initiated and they have already in Lincoln sought the state board's review of their withdrawal. So they're at that point, I believe. And then with Ripton, there's been a long ongoing process before the state board. And I do think all that information is known. It's just a matter of organizing what's known into the requirements within the bill.
And then
Yeah, please.
the other idea that came up recently in my discussion with others was if the board or the agency, however we had it, decides that it's not advisable to withdraw, that the withdrawal or the reformation of the union as it was before doesn't happen in 2023, but you say it will happen, but you have it happen in 2024, so that there isn't a rush to get a new budget and reconstitute the union so quickly, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
I think I do. I think Donna is better to speak to the specific dates on this one.
If I'm understanding what your question is, this is Donna Russo Savage from the Agency of Education. If I'm understanding what your question is if the state board or the secretary, whoever it is who has the final say, decides that the district can't be fully operational of 2023, and therefore it is going to continue to be a unified part of a unified union school district that is its own supervisory union. Do they need more time in order to go back to that? And actually, no, because they are continuing to operate in that way now. They, even though, for example, Ripton, it's this, it's sometimes simplest just to talk about the facts on the ground. Even though Ripton is a school district and has a school board, the sole responsibility of that school board is to prepare to begin operating on July 1, 2023. Until that time, the Unified Union School District is still responsible for educating the students in Ripton in the way they've been educating the students in Ripton for the last several years. So there is the need for budgetary planning to know, for the Union School District, for example, to know whether or not it's going to be responsible for the Ripton students. But other than the budgetary planning, as long as there is enough time for that, they don't need an additional year to do that. They just need to know by November so that they can prepare the budget either with Ripton or without the Ripton students.
So, okay, I guess that makes sense. But we're still stuck with that. We have from July to November to do whatever process we want to do. And I hear what the agency is saying. You can't have a two-step process with only having those, whatever that is, 5 months, 4 months. And we were trying to help. We were talking about a two-step process, but that takes you to December. And that's the prediction. Not that I have an answer, but I think that's.
Donna, you want to weigh in on that?
I'm not sure what it is I'm weighing in on. I'm sorry.
Well, it seems to me like we're going back to the question, and Senator Perks, tell me if I have this accurate. You're concerned that if we're pushing for this July deadline, and then the agency only has 90 days to deal with review and, lack of a better word, execution of a policy decision. Are you feeling like there's a time crunch?
Well, they only have, I guess they have 30 days to respond to the report.
Right.
The way we talked about it, it was, they do something within 30 days, including having a meeting. I think Ms. Simmons brings up a good point, that if both Ripton and Lincoln are doing this, they have 2 reports to review, 2 meetings to be held
Yeah.
in the communities, issue 2 decisions, and then we'll go from there. And so, and then, as we heard from Chair Olson, they don't feel like they have enough time. If they get it, they'll only get a month. So if we give them 2 months, it's a short time between July and November. If that's the only time we have, we're stuck in that time frame. Somebody isn't gonna be happy, I guess.
You want to add something?
I'm thinking, but it doesn't matter if you double the time, they still have to have it done before budget season.
Why don't we let Oliver Olson answer?
Yes.
It's not in the waiting room yet.
So that might be the time frame that we just have to work in. Yeah.
Right.
I get it, it's tight.
So I guess I'm still not clear what the board and what Ms. Simmons' memo is.
Suggesting.
I guess, so kind of going back to just directly going to the SBE. Giving the status report to the SBE. And that's it. It's a one step. We were talking about giving the town this opportunity, some kind of appeal that would not exist with AOE's memo suggestion. Is that right?
Is that accurate, Ms. Simmons?
That is accurate. And if I could put my own spin on it, that reflects current law as well. So in current law, the state board, after a community has voted, is charged with the analysis of whether the students would attend a school that complies with the ed quality standards. I see this, your current bill and this streamline I'm pushing for, as the same analysis that's called for in current law, with more clarity provided by the General Assembly about how those factors ought to be weighed and the detailed process that should govern.
Yeah.
Is AOE opposed to a meeting in the town?
No, we're not opposed to doing the work. We want to point out that it does not seem practical that it would all get done in the time allowed.
They're next to each other and doing 2 places.
Yeah.
I think we stick with that, but go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if you, I don't feel like that was an answer to my question. So one of our requirements was that whoever it is, AOE or BOE, somebody have a hearing actually in the town. Your suggestion talks about taking testimony. Were you objecting to the fact that that testimony happened in the town?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Mr. Olson.
May I add one thing also? I'm sorry, may I add just one thing? And this is Donna. It appears at this point that the question that the Senate is looking to have answered, and that, as Ms. Simmons said, is a an elucidation of what's in current law, is whether or not the new entity is able to provide quality education to the students on the operational date. That, to me, doesn't seem like the kind of question that you go and talk to the citizens about. That's a technical question that you're asking the people who are planning to get the district up and running. The citizens aren't, regardless of why the citizens want to leave, they don't know whether there are going to be teachers in the building, or whether the contract for for the copiers is going to be in place, or, you know, any of the nuts and bolts kinds of things that the school board is going to have to plan in order to be operational.
That's a good point.
Yep.
Berkeley.
Yeah, I hear your argument, but I think it's just in trying to have procedural equity. I think it's important to have it where the people are. And they probably already had a lot of meetings, and you're probably, you know, a lot of people might, you know, I didn't have to go to any of those, so I have a different perspective. But I think for whatever it is, as far as it's what I consider good government, is that you're talking to the people on the ground where they live about it. It's the same with like a transportation project or an energy project. You know, it's important to go and have a hearing at the site and not say, well, we really are just talking to the engineers. This is a technical issue and the lawyers about the law and the engineering, so we don't need to have the meeting there. I think it just helps the citizens to see their government in action in their town, even if the questions aren't, you know, directly to the regular citizen. I think it's important for the regular citizen to see the process in an open and transparent way, as wherever we can do that.
So I don't think we're going to keep this debate going. I think we're generally, I'm seeing people nodding in approval with Senator Perkliff that we'll keep, we want to have this sort of transparency. We want people in the community. We want that kind of work to continue to happen. Mr. Olson.
Yes, thank you, Senator Campion. For the record, Oliver Olson, Chair of the State Board of Education. I did hear a little bit of the discussion before, just a few reflections, and then happy to answer any questions. So first of all, in terms of the meeting in the local community, that sounds very reasonable. I think just, again, in the interest of time and a compressed window, the only potential issue, just to flag, and it's easily resolvable, is what kind of notice period might be required for that meeting. So we don't want to get into a situation where there's a 30-day warning notice period for the meeting that just adds another 30 days to the time frame, which is, to Ms. Simmons' earlier point, a detriment to the process and the time that the local community has. So that's one thought. Another observation is, you know, we need to be mindful of the fact that those communities who are in the midst of the current process are dealing with, are party to a process, as is the state board, that is, you know, structurally deficient in many ways, and has created a lot of angst for everyone involved. We've, you know, the future process will provide much greater predictability and transparency moving forward. So as far as the session law is concerned, and what sort of the amount of review that's involved, I think we should keep in mind that there is always the opportunity for reconsideration, because if the process comes to an end, it can be initiated under the new law, which actually provides a much better process for everybody involved. You know, we're dealing with the here and now, and all of these challenges and the timing, et cetera, because of not to anybody's fault, but through the deficiencies in this 50-year-old statute.
Okay. Yeah, please.
I think it's a question for Donna. The thing I brought up earlier about if the town wanted to close their school. I'm assuming a town part of a union district cannot vote to close their school because they don't control it. But a town that's in this process, do we need to, Donna, do we need to have anything in this bill or the statute that specifically talks about that, or that's already just an option that they could take at any time and we don't need to mention it? If that question makes sense.
Well, I have to think about, I think that it would be, it's the first time that somebody has asked me this, so I'm trying to answer as I think this through. There is a provision. So, for example, Ripton, when it is fully operational, it will be operating pre-K through 6 and tuitioning its 7th through 12th graders. There is a statute in place that applies to all school districts that says if you're a district that operates an elementary school, that's organized to provide for elementary school, you operate a school unless and until the voters vote to close and direct the school board to pay tuition. So I don't know how, I'm not exactly sure how the timing would work. And it would be a little bit difficult, I think, to try to figure out how the timing would work in advance. But there is a statute already that permits the voters to vote to close a school and pay tuition. So I'm not sure that anything would need to be done.
I guess they would have to have control of their school. So for like in the Griffin example, they don't really have control over it, so they can't vote to close it. They would have to successfully withdraw and then decide.
They have successfully withdrawn, they just haven't started being responsible for the education of their students yet. They have a school board, they have voters, they have the responsibility to begin educating their students on July 1 of 2023. I don't think that they need to be physically in control of their building. I mean, they would need to get their attorney to give them the advice on this. I can't give them legal advice. There is a statute that says that voters can vote to close their school and begin paying tuition. I don't, and they wouldn't be making that decision for this year when it's being operated by someone else. They would be making the decision for some year when they're the ones responsible for operating it.
I mean, you basically, Senator Person, I'm just trying to get a sense.
2 years.
Are you thinking that you're concerned that schools can close, create choice districts as they can right now, and you're looking to stop that?
No.
Okay.
I just didn't know if we were, since we were trying to clean up the statute,
Yeah.
that there's in a situation, so we go through this, we pass the bill, it goes through this process. Ripton is told, okay, you gotta go, the SU needs to be reconstituted, and they say, no, now we want to close their school. Do we need to address it, whether you want to address it to prevent them or not? I'm just wondering,
Is there a process?
is there a process that we need to address in the bill? Is it clear, is it clear or not clear? Do we want it to be clear, or are we okay with it not being clear? I guess is the question.
So Donna,
I would say that there is a process, and if they were to vote, they would be voting prospectively for a time when they are actually responsible to educate their students.
So they'd have to find it, make that final separation from the district.
They wouldn't have, I don't think they would necessarily have to make it before they could vote, but they would have to make it before they don't have control over their school now, except as voters in the union school district. As a town school district, they do not have control over their school because they're not responsible for educating their kids yet. As a town school district, they could make a decision that it would be effective when they are responsible for educating their kids. It wouldn't be effective for when the union school district is responsible for educating their kids.
And if the board and the agency say, we don't think you can be ready, so we're telling you to reconstitute, they could have a vote, but it wouldn't matter because they're being forced to reconstitute. So they could not close their school in that instance under what you just said, right, Donna?
If they are no longer responsible for the education of their students as a town school district, they would not have the ability to decide whether they were going to educate the students by operating a school or by paying tuition. They would be doing that as voters and board members of a union school district, correct?
Which the whole district would have to vote on.
The whole district would have to vote on that.
What is it that they're voting on? They're voting on that particular school building will close, or that the entire school district will pay tuition for all of its kids in elementary school. I mean, there's a big difference on what you're, what
Well,
that could be.
I'll let Senator Berkowitz speak for himself.
Yeah, it would be, basically, if Ripton is told to reconstitute with the district, could they say, okay, we don't want to do that. We're going to vote to close the school and be a tuitioning town, or create like North Bennington and say, our school is a private school or an independent school. It seems like I'm hearing you say that they can't do that because they could vote on it, but it would be contingent on them successfully, fully separating and having the responsibility for the education of the children.
I think I can answer the question, Don, if you want me to take a stab
Please.
at it.
Please,
So-
Mr. Olson, I'm asking you to take a stab at it.
I think I understand. I think I understand the concern here, and that is, could they just does closing the school solve the governance problem at hand? And the answer is no, because at the end of the day, even if they close the school, so like Wynn Hall is a good district in Senator Campion's district, right? Wynn Hall does not operate a school, but it still has a school board. That school board is part of a supervisory union, which in turn has responsibility for special education and all the other things. So it's not as simple as just saying we're going to get out of the business of operating a school, because somebody still, and in this case, the newly created school district still has responsibility for all those other services.
I know, I understand that. I just wanted to know if they could do what North Bennington basically did, or if, since have already been in this.
Let's assume for the moment that they did not have a school or did not plan to operate a school, we'd be having the same conversation today, regardless. Because it's not just a matter of operating the school, they also need to provide all these other services.
It's tough to figure out how to provide those services. But wouldn't they be saying we're providing those services by sending them to another school? But I guess the supervisor union has to make those decisions.
And the supervisory
Special
union is
education.
still, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
to be clear, in the case of Ripton, on the path that they're on, they have that responsibility and that legal obligation to provide those services.
Okay, I'll stop my.
No, it's a good, no,
It's a really good question. Yeah.
It's a really good question. I think we're all in agreement with you that, there were concerns about the ones that you raised. But I think, and I'll let Senator Berkowitz continue the line of questioning if he wants, or work on it outside, but I think it's not as easy to do what we're concerned might happen. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Senator Hooker.
So, where do these kids tuition to?
Which is,
If the school closes,
Well, it depends on what school.
if the town decides, to close the school and then becomes a tuitioning school, they tuition these kids into the district that they didn't want to belong to?
they could, or they could go to
Or
anywhere.
Well,
Great-
North Bennington,
great.
I'll just give a quick example. You have the village school, which is the local independent school, or you can go to one of the surrounding independent schools.
So that opens up,
Well-
that opens up the whole.
Right, but Senator Hooker, what we're saying right now is that's less of a concern right now, that's what districts would do.
Right, and that's not what they're saying they want.
Yeah.
Well, yes and no. So just to be totally clear, right? So Ripton, we'll stick with Ripton as an example. They're withdrawing from a supervisory district that operates pre-K through 12. And prior to them becoming part of that district, they operated their own elementary school district, and they were part of a union high school district. So for many, many years, through those configurations, they've been a part of school districts that operate pre-K through 12. Where they're headed now, by withdrawing, they intend to operate pre-K through 6-ish. I think the specifics are still being worked out. and they have no plan whatsoever, no intent of operating the high school grades and potentially the junior high school grades. So those grades will be tuitioned out, and that is a new and different experience for Ripton. Does that help?
Yeah, that is.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Olson, anything else from you at this point? Okay.
Not unless you have any other questions.
Ms. Simmons, you want to continue along on your memo?
Yes. Shall we move on from sections 4 and 6, or did you need more questions and discussion on that?
I don't see any questions right now, so why don't we move forward?
Sure. So my next point, and this is a unique point for Mr. Olson's memo, is about section 8, the moratorium on school closures, and section 9, the report on school closures. So our thought as the agency here is that as your definition of school closure is currently drafted, we feel it will result in unintended consequences. Your current definition of school closure is very broad and would apply to activities that are planned in districts and are funded in budgets that have already been adopted, like moving 6th graders to a middle school or moving a pre-K program to a different, larger facility. And your section 8 as drafted now would have immediate effect on those activities. So in districts where these changes have been planned, we fear the district will not have budgeted to provide space for students in the current location now or the former location if we're thinking about this for next school year. So to go along with that concern, we do support this study in section 9, and we think a benefit of the study is that its existence and the anticipation of that study being available will delay the planning and action on controversial closures that are being considered, and that those districts will wait until they can review the report under section 9. We believe that this gives leverage to those members of union school districts who are concerned about those closure conversations, and they would be saying very reasonably, we ought to wait, see what this report says, and then decide what we're gonna do locally.
Say a quick word about the unintended consequences. Would you repeat what sorts of things might come about if we were not to delete section 8?
Right. So districts in their budget conversations in winter of 2021, budgeting for next school year, have made plans that could move students around. This sort of pulls the rug out from under them and says, oh, you have to actually keep the students where they are, not move them in terms of closure. And there might not be funds to support the former location of those students or the stay in place for those students.
So the language does indicate that the district voters residing in the town would have voted to allow for the closure. And it would seem to me if a closure were coming very soon, that would have been voted perhaps at town meeting. So I'm wondering what the unintended consequence is in that case. I'm trying to sort that out. Because they would have had to vote to make changes, the board would have had to vote to make changes, and refunding of the whole budget would be contingent on maybe closure or moving students. So how many schools are out there that you know of that would be caught in the situation that you're suggesting? That's a short period of time. It doesn't seem like it's till 23.
Right, Senator Lyons, I have to challenge the assumption in your question, actually. Your definition of closure is much broader than those questions that an electorate would have voted on. This definition of closure captures moves of students that would only have been board level decisions. my best example is moving a pre-K program from elementary school A to elementary school B because it is growing and we need more space. So we're going to move pre-K to elementary B. That could include the cessation of all grades. We have some places where pre-K is the only grade offered at a particular building, just as one example. We have, this might be a more popular idea. At the very least, we would ask, so we do not think the moratorium is necessary because very high level, we believe that the study of the issue and the forthcoming report will pause any controversial school closure conversations that are happening out there in the field. However, a more targeted definition of school closure would be enormously helpful if Section 8 stays in the bill. So if you'll look at my memo, the very bottom of page 2, we're proposing a definition that means the district ceases to use the building to provide direct instruction in at least one grade, pre-K through 12. We're also proposing that you limit Section 8 to those union school districts from which there's an ongoing withdrawal action. So really target it at the places you're most concerned about.
Okay.
Well, I was also concerned about other places that are thinking about withdrawing, so that this gives them, like you said, more time. They're like, hey, we don't need to rush into this because there's this moratorium on this as we look at this, as we do this study. But I do think a more broad definition or a more defined definition is warranted, because we say just basically closing any one grade in the definition as we have it would constitute a closure. So I was thinking about if we said a majority of grades, if we use your suggestion, Ms. Simmons, if they could have a pre-K through 12 school and close everything from kindergarten to 12 and just keep the pre-kindergarten there and say, we're not closing the school. So, I mean, I don't know if, people would do that, but the idea was that the heart of the school is still there. For those communities that feel that their local school is the heart of their community, the idea was to give them a moratorium on that might be taken. So, yeah, if they need to take the 5th grade and move it to the middle school, which is the next town over, and like you said, that's a board decision, I think that's fine. But the idea was to prevent it from totally changing what's going on in the school. So they could, that's why I thought the majority of the grades might work as a better way to define it. And on your point, if there's already adopted budgets that did this, I don't know if there's a say like if they're already if it's already been proposed and agreed to, and they just haven't done it yet. I think that's a different matter. Would only be for new decisions made after the bill becomes effective.
Ms. Simmons?
My instinct is to have you hear from Beth on this. The way I read Section 8 is that it would prohibit the closure of grades, so to speak, over the summer, ones that were planned this school year, budgeted this school year for next, and that when the doors open in September, students would no longer be there. I think your current Section 8 prohibits that.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying, yeah, I agree with you. If they're already in the process, that's okay.
So you're comfortable with your Section 8 of language?
I don't like the
I don't like the
kindergarten through grade 12. Like they just have to do
Right.
one grade in there.
I like the majority of.
Yeah.
I think the committee would like to see that in there, Ms. St. James, but using the language, the majority of the grades.
And
Go ahead.
I don't think it should just pertain to the whatever 2 or 3 schools that are in the withdrawal process.
it should be broader, it should be
Should be broader.
statewide.
Right,
Yeah.
but maybe Counselor St. James can come up with language and say that, you know, those that have already been approved, you know, by whatever date, you could go forward, that this is only for new closures.
The St. James?
Sure, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. What I'm hearing is that you would like to see some language that keeps the moratorium and only applies it to school closures that have not already been initiated.
Right.
Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay.
Okay. Ms. Simmons?
I've reached the end of my memo. As long as
Yep.
you see the sunset on page 3, my one little line on page 3, I'm done.
So, Beth, you have now a number of suggestions or a number of things that the committee would like to see happen in this bill. Do you have any questions for us before I add to that list?
I do. Well, do you want to add to that list and then I can repeat back, or do you want me to repeat back what I have right now?
Why don't you repeat back what you have right now?
We're adding the employee transition language.
Yes.
You'd like me to add language regarding the comments from Senator Perchlik regarding adding VLCT to the closure study?
Yeah.
Please.
Extending the closure moratorium to 2 years.
Yes.
We're going to include, on the topic of the closure moratorium, we're going to kind of do a hybrid adoption of AOE's recommendation, and that is to make sure that the moratorium only applies to school closures that have not yet been initiated.
Yes.
And that last amendment proposed by AOE, instead of means the district ceases to use the building, it's to provide education for the majority of the grades.
Yes.
Would you like me to add language asking for a consult with the supervisory union or some way to include the supervisory union in the withdrawal advisory opinion review?
Yes, please.
Okay. And then did you land anywhere on extending Ripton and Lincoln's operational dates?
Yeah, I was talked out of that idea.
Okay. And adding AOE's, I'm sorry, adding AOE's amendments to section 724 and 725.
That's correct.
Okay, that is my list thus far.
So I think you have everything I was going to add, because from what your conversations with the Addison delegation, have we captured everything?
I think so.
Okay, because I'd like those to be in this what likely will be a close to final draft.
Do have one question.
Please.
Emily and Donna, the agency folks. One thing that those folks did wonder about was if January, I guess if that was the Union School District closures report, if that was enough time, January of 2023, for everything that we have in there. If you were interested in more time to do that closure report, given that you're doing all this other stuff in July and August in the fall, moving the report date to later in 2023, because it's not like we need to have that for the legislature, since we're going to do a 2-year moratorium, that if the agency would like to have till, you know, May or something, that's fine. That was one of the things that was pointed out, that maybe that's too short of a time frame for the agency to do a good report. I mean, they would always do a good report, do a thorough report as you want.
Ms. Russo Savage?
I think you should ask my general counsel, actually. I'm not sure that I'd be assigned to that report. And I don't know what other reports we have.
Simmons?
I did not know until now that you were asking for a change to a 2-year moratorium. We would take the extra time in that case. We don't support the 2-year moratorium, but you're not asking me. I'm sorry. We would appreciate more time since it seems to be available. So until May of 2023 would be great.
That's great.
Until the fall of 2023 would be even better.
Yeah, I think that's fine to do September 1st of 2023 or something.
Gives a lot, that's
Or
pushing it
September
back.
15th.
Okay, Ms. St. James, you have that? Okay. So Ms. St. James and Daphne, tomorrow we will gather probably a little earlier if possible. We may gather as early as 1. This is our final work, hopefully. You have a problem with that in terms of scheduling, Ms. St. James?
I do. I have a
Okay.
bill on the floor tomorrow in the
No
House.
problem. 1:30, is that okay?
I will cross my fingers that we are done by then.
Okay, okay, all right, that's fair enough. We'll do our best. And so we'll look and hopefully vote some final version of 727 back and forth tomorrow with folks, getting out any final concerns. Okay. So committee, what we're going to do is we're going to come back at 3:45 and we're going to pick up, we're going to go right to 456. That is, and I want everyone to look at Senator Perchlick's, Senator Perchlick has taken us through his amendment. I don't think anybody has any questions about that, but we're going to just hear some testimony on that and go from there. So Daphne, if you take